Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Before we get into tonight's second half, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It's absolutely free. Click that like button. It takes 1 second. And please leave a comment. All of these things really do help, and they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's second half, shall we? Today's first encounter. My brothers and I were out camping in the woods at our favorite camping spot. We found this place by accident when we were kids, when our dad took us out there during one of our trips. This place became our unofficial camping site from that point on. It's a clearing in the national forest, but it's not a place you could find if you were faint of heart. Now, we're very experienced in the woods, which made this place perfect for us. Even though we couldn't go out there all that often anymore, my brothers and I, we still went there every once in a while when we could manage to still get together, for old time's sake. It was late at night and we had built a fire. We're just sitting there talking when I thought I heard noises, like something moving up ahead of me, in the nearby trees, but just out of range from the firelight. We looked there, and I thought I saw the outline of something tall standing there, staring at us. Something was off, but I thought it was possible for it to be someone who had gotten lost. My brothers didn't agree with me and kept saying that something wasn't right because it just kept standing there. It didn't approach us. We even called out to him, but he ignored us and moved back into the trees instead, where we couldn't see him anymore. But he didn't keep going. He made noises, walking a couple of steps back into the trees, but it felt like he didn't leave, but just stopped right there. We're fairly sure whoever it was, he was hiding there in the trees. I can count on one hand the number of times we came across another person that far out in the woods like that before, in all of the times that we went out there. It isn't to say it couldn't happen, but it just didn't happen. It wasn't a usual occurrence for us. And I didn't like the thought that someone was out there and hid from us like that. Since we even called out to them and they obviously knew that we knew they were there. I didn't like it. It wasn't a good sign about their possible intentions that they hid and didn't either answer us back or leave the area. And I thought it was someone that wanted to either attack us or steal from us. My brothers and I are all armed. But you just can't shoot. You have to make sure you don't shoot someone. Could it be someone drunk or messing with us? Or it could be someone lost and in need of help. But who's going to be messing around with us out there so late at night? I didn't think it was someone messing around with us, but we had to make sure that they weren't actually up to something. I got up and walked closer to the trees with my gun drawn to shine my flashlight on what I still believed at the time was someone hiding in the trees. When I got close, the smell of wet dog hit me like the blast out of nowhere. Then I heard movement up ahead and saw something move behind a tree, just as I found it with my light. I saw a head sticking out from behind the tree, and then I knew it was not another man like I thought it was. I stood there dumbfounded at total loss of words. I expected to see a person, but I saw a long snout and then its teeth as this thing curled its lips up and snarled at me. I backed up in the direction of my brothers and the fire, my flashlight and gun, both still aimed at it, and it came out from behind the tree and followed me. It snarled at me the whole way. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. There was no question it was a wolf. It looked exactly like a wolf, but it stood and walked on two legs. There was no way for me to understand what I saw, none. Not only was it a wolf on two legs, it was muscular and taller than me. I'm 6'3", and I still had to look up to meet its eyes. It was not something I ever envisioned myself seeing at the time in my life. I had not ever considered the possibility of having this happen out there. There was no way to make sense of it. If my brothers hadn't been there with me to back me up on what I saw, I could convince myself I dreamt the whole thing up. Got my facts and memories all mixed up, but no, they saw it, I saw it, we know what we saw. It had a black coat, pointed ears, a wolf-like head, fangs, and eyes of a wolf. It was much bigger and looked heavier than any wolf I had ever seen, but it was still a wolf, not a black bear standing on two legs. Believe me when I say I know the difference. It showed me its huge canine and walked towards me on two legs, looking at me all angry like it wanted to tear me apart. I was focused on it. I couldn't look away from those eyes. They were an orangish yellow. But what stood out to me was there was so much rage and malice in those eyes. Let me just say that I'm not a guy who scares easily. I faced bears, but this thing terrified me in a way no other event in my life ever did. Nothing ever scared me like it did or made me feel I was seconds away from being killed the way this thing made me feel. I knew without hesitation, without a shadow of a doubt, that it wanted us dead. I aimed my gun but heard one of my brothers fire a warning shot before I could do anything. It didn't stop. It was not a man wearing a costume to mess around with us. Otherwise, he would have made that clear right then and there. The joke would have been over. Instead, it got closer and both me and my brother fired more shots and hit it in the stomach area. It ran back into the woods that time, and it ran on two legs. We shone our flashlights in the direction it ran. I tried so hard to track it with the light, but it moved so fast. I couldn't keep up with it. Find yourself dead set focused on something like that. You try with all your might and all your concentration to find it somewhere out in front of you. It has all of your attention. You're trying very hard to locate it. The last thing you think about is there's another one that's sneaking up from behind you. We heard the growling behind us, turned around and saw there was another one. It would have gotten us, but the growling gave it away. That was the only clue, the only thing to indicate there was another one there. There was no other noises or any other sound of movement behind us. It looked exactly like the first one, but even bigger. I don't know if it was just the same one, but I don't think it could have ran that fast to get behind us, and it was bigger. It also didn't have any wounds on it where we shot at the first one. This one also walked on two legs. It was close to my brother and caught us by surprise. He was caught off guard, and before he had time to fire at it, my other brother let loose a shot in the head. It ran back into the trees, and we heard it run off into the distance. Then we didn't hear it. We didn't hear anything anymore. That was enough. We got all our stuff together and got out of there. We weren't staying there another night. The trek back to the trucks was nerve-wracking. I told you I don't scare easily. Plenty of noises happened out there in the woods, but I don't jump at them. After what we had just been through, I jumped at every noise on the way back. Every noise scared us. We were on edge. We made it back to the trucks without further incident, though. We never went camping back out in that spot. We didn't talk about it to each other for a long time. It's been a long time since it happened, but trying to get over what happened is still difficult for me. I have nightmares ever since. I've tried very hard to put it out of my mind, to forget about it. There is now a deep dread of going out into the woods that I feel. I never felt that before, as far as I can remember. And honestly, I haven't gone back camping at all since. And neither has my brothers. We all have families. I just don't think it's worth putting my family at risk of not having a husband or a father there anymore by getting killed out in the woods by something like that. I tried to find information that could help me understand what I experienced, but it wasn't any good. I wanted to talk about it to someone who knew what those things were that I saw. Someone that had really knowledge of them. I really did, but I didn't go talking about it to anyone, and I'm not about to go back into the woods and look for them. Before I saw them, I didn't believe in any strange stories or anything like that. I understand if people don't believe what I said happened. Life is like that, and I don't care if someone else believes me or not. I know what I saw, and my brothers know what they saw. We know what we saw out there in the woods that night. Today's second encounter. My spouse and I both saw something when we used to live in Michigan. We were walking on a trail when what I thought was a huge black dog came walking around the bend in the trail up ahead. Even from a distance, we could see that it was way too big to be an ordinary dog. We stopped and watched it, hoping for it to go away. But it stayed where it was and watched us in return. Then it abruptly started running towards us. We started running away, but I knew we would not be able to outrun it. I told my wife to go, and I turned around to face it. She wouldn't leave me there, and we both got ready for it. It had gotten closer, but stopped when it saw that we weren't leaving. Then it stood up on its hind legs. I don't think it could have been a person playing a trick on us, because when it was running on all fours, it ran just the way a dog would run and moved too fast for a human. Then when it stood up, it was at least 7 to 8 feet tall and very burly. It wasn't that close, but it was close enough that I could see it didn't have a snout and didn't have a dog's head either, like I originally thought it did when it was further away. The shape of the head was very strange from what I could make out, but I didn't get a good look or have that long to look at it. It was also covered in black hair all over its face and body. It was just standing there now. It made this kind of huffing noise and looked at us a while. Then it just walked off into the trees on 2 legs. The memory of that scene has never left me. It was about 8 years ago, but it's still something I'm just not able to forget about. Today's third encounter. My family moved from the city to a rural area in North Georgia when this happened. Back then, the place was not as developed as what you see today. The nearest major road was 30 minutes away. Now it's so modern and populated that I can drive a few streets and end up on a heavily traveled road where there's a good chance of being stuck in traffic. But back then, the area I lived in was located in a heavily wooded area, with a dense area of trees starting right at my backyard. Some distance beyond the trees, however, was an old abandoned school with a large playground. I was an adventurous child, and I used to go through the woods just to get there. I could have gone there by walking along the actual main roads, but that took too long. Besides, I liked the woods and would explore them. I wasn't the type of person who liked being inside if I had the option of being outside, especially now that we were out of the city and there was so much to explore and discover. So after I discovered the shortcut to the playground, I started going there almost daily because I really loved the swings. One time my sister wanted to go there with me, so we went together late in the afternoon. By using the shortcut through the woods to get there, we were playing there for a while. Periodically, we would hear some loud noises coming from the forest that I never noticed hearing before on any of my previous trips. It sounded as if someone was hitting a tree as hard as they could with a baseball bat. As the noises began occurring more frequently, my sister was clearly getting more and more scared and beginning to regret her decision of going out there with me. It was also starting to get dark, so we decided to go back through the forest. Just when we approached the edge of the playground and the start of the forest, I happened to see a tall, rather broad silhouette watching us a little way off into the woods. It was openly standing between two trees and watching us. Whatever it was much wider than any of the trees there, and even from a distance I could tell that it was much taller and was wider than any person I had ever seen, including all of the people who I knew to live around the area. My sister let out a gasp when she saw it and grabbed my hand, which made me look at her. When I looked back, I looked as if the silhouette had come closer, as if it had begun moving towards us. Though it would have been faster to go home through the forest, my sister absolutely refused to take another step toward the trees. So instead, we went to the entrance of the school and headed back home the much longer way by way of the road. The area had enough trees that a person could have just followed us by the side of the roads by walking through the woods the whole way. Unfortunately, that's what happened. While it was following us, it kept making loud noises in the trees the whole way back. We could hear footsteps and the sound of the brush being moved through the branches and debris as it stepped on them. Once in a while, there would be a couple of weird noises. It carried on like this while we walked. Whenever we would try to look and see what was making the noises, we wouldn't be able to see anything because it was also too dark by then. We continued our way home, followed by whatever was paralleling us in the woods, until our parents found us. They were driving to the school to look for us. We were so relieved that we didn't argue at all while being scolded. They were very angry with us, the kind of anger that comes with being very worried. We were really scared from our experience, and as we drove home, we told them about what happened. They were alarmed, thinking that some sort of person had been following us. That kind of thing wasn't very common where we lived in those days, especially given the rural setting. It had been a safe area, but times were changing, I guess. After that, they were stricter about where we were allowed to go and for how long. The forest was now off limits, and so was the playground. I missed the swing in the woods, but I knew it wasn't worth the risk if it turned out to be the case that someone or something was hiding in there. I always wondered what that figure was. Taking the road back was meant to give us a better chance of getting home safely, as opposed to going through the forest, which I assumed would have been the natural home of the predator. If it was a predator, it had plenty of time to attack, but instead, it made a lot of noise, and it did so for a very long time, as if it was trying to scare us or follow us instead. Also, a person would also have had enough chances to grab us while we were walking back, instead of pointlessly terrorizing us while hiding in the trees along the way. Maybe it was a person, and they gave up when my parents found us and drove us home, but when I think about how tall and how wide the silhouette had been when I originally saw it, well, with that in my mind, I just don't believe it was a person. Today's fourth encounter. Several years ago, after a long and difficult week at work, I was finally able to sit down and begin enjoying a Friday evening when I received a call late in the evening that there had been a family emergency resulting in immediate hospitalization of a family member. The hospital was in Georgia, but I lived in Texas at the time. I was no stranger to frequent travel, but all of it was done by road, as I would have not taken a plane anywhere and was used to the long interstate drives. After all, I had driven through several states to Texas when I moved there. So I immediately packed a bag and went to the computer and printed out directions. To make this trip, I had to drive through a few states, including Alabama. These days, I can just enter the destination into my phone and get instant live directions. But this happened before smartphones were so widespread, and before I had anything even remotely resembling a GPS. Instead, I had to use websites like MapQuest and Google Maps to print the directions out in advance, and had to carry a state map with me just as well. With that done, I packed everything I needed and set off. The drive through East Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi is not particularly memorable, though I was tired after hours of traveling into the night. I was more worried about my family member. Eventually, along the part of leading into Birmingham, Alabama, however, I was surprised to find a huge traffic jam. Back then, I was annoyed there had been so many people on the road that late at night, to the point of creating a traffic jam. I was eventually able to exit the highway and went to refill my car at the gas station, where an employee told me that the traffic jam was most likely due to the major football victory and the post-game celebration running into the night. Determined not to lose any additional time by being stuck in traffic, I looked over the maps carefully and found what appeared to be back roads that would take me from the city, but also around the traffic jam. I would be able to get back to the highway at some point just beyond the city, so instead of returning to the highway, I took the new route I had mapped out. Everything was fine at first. There were fewer cars, and I was finally able to move on to an acceptable pace. However, more than an hour later, it no longer seemed like a good idea at all to take this route. I hadn't seen any signs of people, meaning cars, houses, or any kind of building really, for a while. And then eventually there were no more streetlights either, except for the light coming from my car's headlight in front of me. There was no light at all. Also, wherever it was that I had gotten to, I had to drive rather slowly as the road kept curving, and I was afraid of hitting something that I would not be able to see in time. I could see enough, however, to be keenly aware that there was dense woods reaching into the darkness on both sides. I had seen similar sights in other states, but never by myself at 2 a.m. I was starting to get worried, especially in terms of risk of being lost and stranded in the middle of nowhere, but I didn't know if it would be better to turn back or keep going. So I pulled off the road to look at the map to try to figure out where I was. Having parked the car, I got out my flashlight and checked the map. As I studied it, I heard a sudden noise on the side of my car. I ignored it. Then something hit the car harder. It was louder and startled me. I had the window down and aimed the flashlight at the noise, but didn't see anything. Then another noise happened on the opposite side of the car, followed by another. Since the window was open, I could easily tell that it wasn't windy at all, and it was not raining. So I didn't know what could have caused this noise and what was hitting my car. I was worried some wild animal had gotten near and began to close the window when I heard what sounded like branches breaking from the forested area on the opposite side of the road from me. I shined the flashlight in that direction when I saw a pair of red eyes shining back at me. I held my breath and stopped breathing altogether. I was not familiar with Alabama wildlife and wouldn't have been able to tell you what lived out in the wilds that had red eyes. I also saw that the eyes appeared to be set far apart from one another, which made me think whatever it was had to be big. I stared out into the darkness to try to see what sort of animal it was. A normal animal should have gone away, but this was waiting there, watching. Then something hit the car from the opposite side. I looked in that direction and saw a pair of eyes in the trees beyond. The distance to the second pair of eyes seemed further, at least relatively further from my position than the distance to the first pair of eyes. Since the first pair of eyes seemed to be closer, I quickly looked back at the first to make sure it wasn't coming closer to me. The first pair of eyes were still there where it originally was, but now it began to rise upward. While still looking directly at me, it went from what was probably a few feet from the ground to almost 3 times its original height. It was still in the woods, but I expect that if it was a raccoon climbing a tree, it would have at least looked away from me at some point, but nope, this thing was just standing there. It didn't move left or right. It didn't look away. It just stared at me. I was transfixed, and then something hit the car much harder from the other side again. That snapped me out of my fascination. I started the car to get out of there. I drove away. And though it was too dark to see if they were on the road behind me, I didn't see any eye shine in the area behind me as I drove. At that point, I just wanted to get away as fast as possible. I could figure out the rest of the road later, and once I had gained some distance, I began to feel a little better, relieved, really, that it had not followed me, or so I thought. What I heard next I will never forget. Roars seemed to erupt out of the darkness from the trees all around me. Roars so loud and so deep that the car itself was vibrating as if a response. Have you ever been in your car when a plane flies low overhead, causing your car to shake? That's what was happening. It's not just that I could hear it in my ears, but I felt it through my hands as I gripped my steering wheel. And I felt it through my legs and through my feet on the car's floor. And I felt it through my back on the driver's seat. It was so loud and so deafening that it felt as if the sound was reverberating through my bones. By then I was urgently trying to get away, but was still focused to drive more slowly than I would have preferred because of the darkness and because of the curving roads. A very bad possibility, as I saw it at that moment, would have been driving off the road. Even worse, though, would have been to have hit something on the road that I feared could appear out of a corner every time the road curved, causing an accident and causing me to be stuck out there with whatever was roaring at me. I was able to get away from the sounds and eventually from that part of the road where the trees were on both sides. After some more driving, I eventually found some road signs that would lead me back to the bigger roads, which in turn would eventually make it possible for me to find my way back to the highway. When I saw a gas station, I pulled in and just sat there for a while, trying to calm down and make sense out of what had just happened. Eventually, I got out of the car to refill the gas and use the restroom. When I looked over to the car afterwards, I saw indentations in the sides that looked like it had been hit by rocks. There was no damage like this before the trip, as I always took good care of my car. I wasn't able to explain what caused it, or what I had seen or heard. In fact, I probably would have never thought about it again, except for all of the roaring. I don't feel I had been able to adequately put into words what it was like to hear or feel it. I've never told anyone this story before. Who would believe it? I don't have any proof, and maybe someone could explain it away, saying that it was just some regular animal, which I know it wasn't. So, what was it? In the years since then, I've looked for and listened to recordings from different wildlife: bear, mountain lion, different kinds of wildcats, wolves, fox, coyotes, owls, deer, and never found anything that came close to having a roar as loud and as deep as what I heard that night in the back roads of Alabama. Today's final encounter. During all of my years driving as a trucker, I've seen some strange things out there. I mean, you really see a lot of things out there on the roads in the middle of night. And it looks to me that it gets more likely if it's out in the middle of nowhere. As far as creatures go, the strangest thing I ever saw was on a road in Wisconsin. While I was passing through a wooded area, two shining pairs of blue eyes caught my attention. They were staring at me from the line of trees and watching as I drove by. When I got closer, I saw what they belonged to. What really got me was their size. They were clearly dogs, but they were massive. Each looked to be as big and as wide as a bear. I watched as they suddenly stood up on their hind legs, looked at each other, and walked off together and disappeared into the trees. This was the most unsettling thing I have ever seen in my life. All right, guys. 2 awesome uploads to end your week or start your week, whichever way you look at Sunday, the beginning or the end. I hope you all enjoyed today's uploads as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. I'd like to thank you all for all your support. For those of you that were in the live stream last night, I had a blast. Live streams are certainly something to look forward to on Saturday nights, and definitely just a good time. So with that, thank you once again. May the Great Spirit watch over us all. May He guide us down the path we call life.